What's going on, everybody? My name is Branson Brooks, and I am a contributor for the DC Voice. And today, I have the pleasure of speaking with the assistant principal of Jamestown Elementary and a fifth generation Georgetowner, Dr. Monica Roache. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you for being here with me, Dr. Monica Roache.
Sure, I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. And for our first question, I just want to kind of get into a little icebreaker. We know you're a fifth generation Georgetowner, so we want to talk about what's your favorite place in Georgetown and kind of what, even if it stretches from childhood or now, or if it's changed, what kind of your favorite safe haven in Georgetown?
So I would say one of my favorite parts of Georgetown is going to hang out, is going to the waterfront. I was there last night, actually. I can just walk right down the street and see the beautiful, water and all the action. But growing up, my favorite place to go was Rose Park Playground, which is right 2 blocks down. I got to go there for camps. I learned how to play tennis there. And back then, your parents would let you go to the playground by yourself. That you felt like the community was safe and it wasn't an issue. So I would go down for a little bit, play. If my mother didn't go, she knew I would go with my cousins and have a good time. And it's still a beautiful park.
Okay, okay. And kind of just leaning off that, how do you feel the neighborhood has changed since your childhood? Do you feel like that park has changed, or even something like the Georgetown waterfront? Is it kind of the same as it was back then, or there's kind of rules and regulation that was different?
So my experience growing up in Georgetown was very different than my parents. I'm on my mother's and my aunts. So by the time when I grew up, I was born in the 70s. Georgetown had more Black families. So like right now, there's only 5 Black families that have been here for generations that are left. But really now it's down to 4 because one just sold. So I didn't have the rich African American community in terms of youth. The families that were left were older families.
Okay.
So when I would hear these rich stories of community days and all Black baseball teams and or softball teams, that wasn't my experience because in the 50s or the I would say in starting in the 50s, Black families started moving out, but they started moving out for various reasons.
Okay.
One, the property owner would have the property be in such disrepair, or the conditions were so bad to get them out and to force them out. So it was one way to get rid of African American families. The other was the old Georgetown Act that was put in place where you could not sell your home to an African American family. So just through time and through various measures, families were pushed out, or they didn't understand the value of what Georgetown would become, because some areas were considered slum areas. And so just every year less and less. And so growing up in the 70s, growing up in the 80s, when the family members would die, the family would sell the house. So I do remember this block having 6, 7, 8 families, next block having 3 Black families, but like I said, it's down to little nothing. So my experience is pretty much similar. I would say less families, but I didn't have, besides my cousin, I didn't have any other African American families to play with. The waterfront was getting built, and so when it finally opened, I was probably 10. It's like what it looks like now, with maybe not as many restaurants, but so
Okay.
that hasn't changed.
Okay. Okay. You
And
kind
I would be envious. Just one with I would be envious when I would hear these wonderful stories of the rich African American communities with stores and thriving churches. So I would be envious to hear that when my family would share.
Okay, and this was kind of when you're talking more so stories about when Georgetown first kind of came about and when they were kind of doing
Georgetown had a thriving African American community.
it.
So
Okay.
the 50s is really when it, they started to move out. 50s and the 60s.
Okay.
And so hearing their stories were very different than mine.
Okay. Okay. And kind of from those stories, 'cause that makes a lot of sense from me doing a little research, watching the Black community in Georgetown side of those documentaries. I heard a lot about kind of the stories of how they're, I guess, moved, like you said, moved out of their houses without really knowing the worth or the kind of thing, or kind of the, I would say, the value behind their houses until they were either kind of already
And
gone.
these houses are old. I'm very fortunate. I'm in my family house. My family bought this was their second or third home, and they bought this house in 1941. But it's old houses, and so it's a lot of money. Families couldn't afford to fix the house up or make it livable. And also, even though these tiny little houses around here, are going for $700,000, 800,000, you could people wanted more room, more space. You can go to other parts of the city and have a yard and have more bedrooms. So some of it's just where you can get the most for your money. And so that was another reason. I always say Georgetown was one of the first gentrified neighborhoods of DC.
Yeah. Yes, and yes, it's definitely one of the first, and you see that all around DC at this point, which is kind
Neighborhoods I never thought would go back to. Well, one time Southeast had a large white population. Anacostia was the white families went there, and so times change, and people leave, they come back, and now we see people that my aunt would say after Martin Luther King was killed, there was white flight, around the riots, but now people are coming back to the city, and people willing to live in small spaces just to say they're in the city. So yeah, definitely times are changing.
yes, yes, and even
Mhm.
with me being a Howard grad, just seeing the kind of gentrification around that area, around
That's been happening. I
yeah,
mean,
that's what they said.
just how over yeah around where Banneker go to Banneker's swimming pool and see who's in there. And
Yeah,
my mother went to Banneker. Even though she lived over here, Banneker was a junior high school, and so that's where some African American families here would go to school, and so I know what the history is and what it used to be. So yes,
and kind of just reflecting on that history. I know if I'm not mistaken, you're still in the house that you kind of grew up in,
on
trying.
the house. So what's very important to me is that we continue to tell our story. Because when you say Georgetown, everyone's like, "Oh, you're in Georgetown." Well, my family's been here. I just didn't get here. And if you don't tell what this community used to be, people have no idea because
Yeah,
they come here, they see the designer shops, they see the mansions and the fancy cars. But this was a thriving community, and what I always tell people, it wasn't just domestic work. My family were domestic workers. My family also worked in the government. My family also were educators. So, but we were doctors, lawyers. We owned businesses. There were businesses all around where my home is. Cleaners, hairdressers, just clubs. So, it was a very self-sustaining community, but we also didn't have a choice because there were certain parks African American families couldn't go to, certain areas we couldn't go to. So I'm very involved politically. I was an advisory neighborhood commissioner here for 2 terms, and I'm currently in the Democratic Party, the DC Democratic Party. I'm an at-large committee woman. So every time I can tell our story and tell the history, I use my platform to do that. So when I was an ANC commissioner at Rose Park Playground, which was the African American playground, actually it was one of the first integrated playgrounds in DC.
yeah,
So all were welcome, but we were not allowed. Black families were not allowed to go to Montrose Park, which is on our street at that time. So we had no choice to go to Rose Park. But anyway, um, family friends, the Peters sisters, Margaret and Romania Peters, were local tennis legends. One even beat Althea Gibson, and they grew up here in Georgetown. Attended my church. Their daughter still comes over for special services at Epiphany Catholic Church, which is my church. And I took tennis lessons from them. And so it was very important for me to have them recognized. And working with the city and working with former Homeland Security Director Johnson, we were able to, and donations, do a plaque and dedicate the tennis court to them. And if they would have been the Venus and Serena of their times if, they were able to play in all the different various tennis matches. And
And afforded
you
that opportunity.
know, yes, yes, yes. And so that was one thing. Um, what I do like is that African American families still come back to some of the churches on Sundays, to First Baptist, to Jerusalem, to Mount Zion, for service, even though they don't live here anymore. Unfortunately, my church, the African American families only come back if it's something special, happening. They don't come back every every week. I also like to celebrate the rich history of my church, because my church, Epiphany Catholic Church, was formed by my great great grandparents and other Black families because they were tired of the treatment that they received from Trinity Catholic Church, which is a very well known church. The Kennedys went to Trinity, but Black families weren't allowed to sit in the main part of the church. They had to sit on the balconies. They couldn't be baptized with the white parishioners. And so they families came together. They raised money. They had fish dinners. They did everything they could, and working with the Catholic Church to form Epiphany Catholic Church. So it's a lot of very rich history there. So just telling these stories and doing walking tours and making sure people understand these historical markers, down the old Dean and DeLuca building, which is now a very trendy Italian restaurant. Well, that was where slaves were sold, right on M Street. And so just these things you think, oh, we're DC. We're not the deep South yet, but there were slaves in Georgetown. There were slaves here. They were brought in, on the waterfront. And there's historical markers down the waterfront where slaves were brought. So, I just try to just tell my story. I also encourage people to buy the book Black Georgetown Remembered. I'm in that. My family's in that. It is on Amazon. It's by Georgetown University Press, and there's also a video you can look on YouTube that PBS often shows. And then recently we did Howard University did a video talking to some of the families, the African American families here in Georgetown. So, I mean, unfortunately, those that were around are passing, and you try to capture and get family members to talk, and former residents to talk and tell their stories, because once they're gone, that's it. And there's only a few left that really have those memories to share.
Yes. And is that why you kind of, like you said, pursued a career, I would say, in the government and in education to kind of be one of the people left to kind of be able to tell those stories about?
I do, and I also feel my mom died young. She was 66, which I think is relatively young. And I just wanted her, I mean, because people are like, don't sell your house. Don't sell your house. My mother would turn over in her grave. My aunt would turn over their grave because they worked so hard to to stay in this home. My grandfather would rent rooms, have multiple jobs. And so it's just very important that I just keep this rich story, this rich history. I've talked about, I don't have any kids, I'm not married. And I talk about how to keep this, if anything happens to me, to keep this history going. And now it's me and the house next door. The two houses next door are now, we are the next generation that own the homes, that are in the homes. And we've talked about finding possibly grants to make these homes a museum, or some type of historical center where we could have the photos, the stories, the audio, the videos, just to continue. So that's something that we're just looking into, like what we could do, whether we make it some type of hotel or inn or just something that we can do to preserve these homes.
Okay. And do you feel like kind of your work as well in the government platform kind of give you the, I would
Oh,
say,
absolutely, absolutely, because I am around through my community service work that I do for the government. That's all through volunteerism. I'm in the circles to talk to people when there's funding opportunity, when there's grant opportunities. I invite the council members out too, and we have a dedication at the cemetery, which Mount Mount Zion Female Union Band Cemetery, which is right up the street, was where um, slaves and free African Americans were buried. It also was a stop for the Underground Railroad. And so you can actually see where they would hide slaves. It's right by Rock Creek Park, so it's a very wooded area. And so I definitely suggest you talk to Lisa and go and visit that. So we'll have various programs, and of course, funding is limited. So they're always welcoming donations, but they're also always open to volunteers to come and clean the cemetery, and because it's no longer used to bury people. But over the years, the condition of the tombstones and the property had declined. And so now it's beautiful. They're trying to maintain, and just to hear the history that played in that being a marker so people could come when they're trying to escape.
okay, wow, I
Mhm.
definitely know that. And it's like the different things that
That are
Georgia
right here.
and
Yes.
yeah, Black community just like kind of under our noses that we just drive
Mhm.
around every day. It's just profound to learn about. So wow.
Mhm.
And kind of just bouncing off that history sentiment. I mean, because like you said, the kind of thing we can uncover every day about Georgetown and just DC in general. I would want to ask, what do you wish more people understood about Black history in Georgetown and the culture embedded in Georgetown, kind of for some like final
I
thing.
just hope people understand how, with the whatever opportunities they had, the leaders, the church leaders, the community leaders, would fight for the residents. And I feel that's kind of just an issue in DC overall, as people are coming into neighborhoods that were of people of color, not trying to erase the culture of that community. If you want to live in the culture, the festivals that happen, the food places, the music celebrations, don't come in and try to erase that and take that away when that is the culture that's been in that community for generations. Get to know your community. You want to live in DC, you want to buy in DC, know the history of the architecture of the homes, know the history of the community, the religious aspect, the cultural aspect, not just coming in to live in the city, but just be a part of that community. And that's just what I hope people will value when they move into Georgetown or move into the communities. And again, understand that these people also fought for better conditions. The African American families, they wanted to expand economic wealth, education, and pass that generational wealth and inheritance and opportunities to their families.
What do you feel like what does it feel like also to be able to carry, you talk about legacy, your family's legacy in Georgetown, especially your late mother Martha, as we spoke about before. What does it mean to be able to just continue to carry that legacy in Georgetown as one of the few as kind of diminishing Black people in struggle?
See, this my mother's heavenly birthday was July 2nd, and I always just try to continue to make her proud. And now, um, I guess that I'm because my mother was an educator too. I continue to worry about DC youth, not necessarily just limited to Georgetown, but how can I continue to ensure that there's funding for DC youth? I used to go to Jelliff Boys and Girls Club here in Georgetown near the Safeway. So how can we, with all these budget cuts and federal government cuts and everything going on, how can we continue to fund after school programs? How can we continue to fund recreation centers to have weekend and summer and after school so kids are not on the street getting into trouble? Um, I, being in education, I work in Virginia school system, but how will we continue to hire mental health therapists? That's an issue all over, and no matter what district you're in. These our kids are experiencing a lot of trauma, not just in their neighborhoods, but trauma. Do you turn on the news? It's trauma.
Yeah.
You're hearing about violence in this country, violence, people driving through crowds on purpose, um, possibly a war. I mean, all these things that the first thing they cut are counselors, are electives and specials where kids can express themselves through the arts. So I wonder, like, in terms of like next or what activism I will do in the city. It's definitely going to be around children, especially as my career as I um, complete one phase of my career, like what's next and where to find this funding. And I mean, everyone is nonprofits are struggling, but that's just kind of to me there to make sure the curriculum continues to tell the true history, no matter how ugly the history is. Know all sides of history. Just taking it out of a book doesn't erase it. It's,
Yeah.
it still happened. And to be proud that no matter what was thrown our way, we were able to fight and get through it. And kids just don't know. They just don't know. And so if you don't teach them how, or parents may not know, that just to find opportunities for kids to explore all of their city that's free to explore. And go to Howard, go to UDC, look at people that look like them. That exposure, and that's something that adults and kids need to know and learn.
Yes, yes, and just kind of just see the
Mm.
history that can be able they're afforded to in the Capitol, especially all this Black history, like you said. Getting that at a young age really is unmatched. So that
Yes,
definitely makes a
yes,
lot of sense.
yes.
And you kind of spoke on the challenges facing educators in DC right now and things that are trying to be implemented. But is there anything that really, in the grand scheme of things, gives you hope that this can be improved in the near future and kind of implemented in terms of kind of influencing these young children?
I love the advocacy that the young kids are speaking up for themselves.
Yeah.
I love that aspect. I believe that social media, in terms of that's a positive. That word gets spread. Kids are showing up to protest or march. They're coming to budget hearings. They are making themselves known or the issues they want. I think just talk to the youth. What is it that they're concerned about? What it is that they're worried about? Is it safety getting to school? Is it having resources to go to college? Resources for even public transportation? Uber is expensive. Everyone can't afford Uber to get to a job or to get to an internship. Now that they're cutting back bus service in the city, that's going to impact people. So really, we can make a lot of assumptions of what adults need in certain communities and what kids need, but to have like town halls and listening sessions, people come and share their struggles or their successes or what city services have worked for them. I think that's very important, and to act on it, not just to have people give their time and come out and you don't respect and listen. What can be done? I think that the mayor is doing the best she can with the government being what it is at this time and fighting and standing up for the city, which is very hard. I give her credit. And so to continue to support her, to continue to support the council members in what it is they need. Um, I encourage people to go to Capitol Hill and make our voices known that we need statehood. We need to make our own decisions. We need to make sure there's funding for our city, that we have rights. Um, calling senators and congressmen that support the city, getting to know who those representatives are. That's what things I would be teaching the youth right now.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. And kind of just be like you said, being able to empower themselves so they know they kind of can hear it firsthand from the people who are really getting affected by it. Because before we know it, they are going to be the ones that are kind of the lead change
absolutely.
makers in.
Yes, these young kids today, or young adults, have so many opportunities we didn't have. They have the use of technology and AI, and I mean, just the world is so open to them, and it's really interesting to see where it goes.
Okay. Okay. And kind of also just for a little last sentiment, do you feel like your Georgetown upbringing it kind of informed the way you lead and kind of was able to connect, be
Absolutely,
able
I was raised in a very strong home. I was lucky to live with my grandfather, my aunt, and my mother. My aunt was 18 years older than my mom, so she was almost like a grandmother.
to.
My grandfather lived to be 91. And so I was raised to work hard. I was raised that education is your way out. My mother, being a house educator, I didn't have a choice. There was not, are you going to college? No, where are you going? Which one are you going to? My mother went to Howard and was so upset I did not go to Howard that I went to the other HU, Hampton University, which she loved. But
You know,
I was very important for me to go to HBCU because I had always been in a diverse community. I went to a diverse high school, went to Woodrow Wilson, which is now Jackson Reed. I was always in these circles, but it was important to me to be around African American scholars like myself, and that's why I chose. But I was always taught to be proud that no one is going to hold you back based on your circumstances. And I was the first African American to be an ANC commissioner over here in Georgetown. Um, I just try to use my platform just to get the word out. And I'm, thinking about like what projects are next, and really trying to find grant funding to have more like tours of the Georgetown, and to go around to these landmarks that are these African American landmarks, to say this, see this, where this store is. This used to be a bank, or this used to be a hairdresser. This used to be a deli. This theater was this black business, and how we overcame.
you
Uh, yes.
know, it sounds like a lot you overcome, especially being the first, chair or ANC.
Oh, I'm making myself known. I've gone to meeting. Now everybody knows me around here. But I would go to community meetings, and people would say to me, "Oh, well, how long have you been here?" And I would be, my response would be, "Longer than you." It's because, like, don't have an assumption that I don't belong. I mean, my growing up, I remember my mother would answer the door and they were like, "Is the lady of the house here?" I mean, that type of ignorance, still exists. And unfortunately, in this day and age, we're still dealing with it. But I really want to make myself known. My neighbors, African American neighbors, we want to make ourselves known and to keep telling our stories.
Okay, okay. And your neighbors in that are around your house, have they been long standing in?
Yes, yes, they've just been family's been here as long as the Bowman family, the Marshall family. They just actually sold the Waters family, and the Burnett's. We are the families that are still own property here.
Okay, okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And yeah,
But like I said, growing up, there was a lot of families that were still older. There were older residents, but they were still here.
okay.
And
And
it's hard. I'm not going to say it's not hard to maintain. It's always something wrong. These almost 200-year-old homes. The taxes are insane. I'm not old enough to get a senior discount. There's no program. Well, there's a Homestead Act, which gives me a little bit off taxes, but it is extremely hard to be able to afford to stay in this house, even though my family's had this house because of the upkeep, because of the expenses. And so that's the part of the story that sometimes people are forced to sell. And if anything, I would hope the city would change some of the guidelines to people who have had property for generations and generations. I didn't just come over here and spend $2 million on a house. I think my grandfather probably paid 16,000 for this house in 1941, and that was a lot. Of 16, 20,000 the houses were going for. That was a lot of money back then. And so I know you have to pay taxes. The city has to make their money, but it's got to be something, because I have friends all over the city in my age group. I'm 52 that are dealing with the same thing. They are inheriting. I don't care where in DC you live. A house is worth a lot of money and it's very expensive. And the same thing, their families had this house for generations, but you're paying taxes as if we were just buying these homes for $1 million. So that has to change. Something has to change for people who aren't 65 and up, but want to stay in the city. They don't want to be forced out. So that's something I always say and say to different elected officials, and I'll keep fighting for that.
Okay, and that's a great fight to fight for
Mm,
sure, because everybody is not trying to move out the area that they're kind of, as you
right.
said, their history and their kind of upbringing is in, and kind of just because I definitely found that information if interesting. Do you feel with all the upkeep and kind of just the other stuff that have been added and staying to your house and staying in the area, do you feel like it more so still has, I would say, characteristics, or I would say principles that still feel the same as when you grew up, or is it kind of
In
like,
terms of the architecture, that like the house,
I would say kind of in terms of the feeling in general and the architecture,
um,
just the whole
I
area.
do feel isolated. If I didn't have the families that are left, I don't know if I would stay in the house. I wouldn't sell it,
Yeah.
but I may rent it if I didn't have my neighbor to lean over the fence and talk to and joke with. I've made friends, through my with my neighbors and things, but it's not the same as I would, as a child, walk down the alley. I could go into 3 or 4 homes, get a snack,
Uh,
play with the dog, see the family members, auntie this, auntie that, ride my bicycle up and down. All that's gone, and that's very sad. It's very sad that um, that community, that sense of community. If I did something wrong, everybody knew. So I was younger, much younger than the rest of the families, but you couldn't tell me anything. I was, the door would be open. Here comes Monica, up and down. I miss that. I think that's one of the hardest things, and especially if during my mom's birthday 2 days ago, I was reflecting on my house was such the social house. Everyone came to my house. Everyone hung out in my house. Also because my grandfather was blind, but he had his mind. Very social. He could actually walk out the house and walk down the stairs and sit on the bench by himself. So people just tended to come to my house or the Waters house next door. And so when everyone passed, my mom and aunt passed 18 months apart. I was like, wow, this house is so quiet. I never I never was a latchkey kid because somebody was always home. I never was ever. I mean, I think I was almost 40 before I slept in this house by myself
wow.
because it was always someone here. Always, like I said, my aunt lived to be 86, my grandpa lived to be 91. And that's what I say I miss. I
Okay.
truly, truly miss. So I just have to, and I just invite people over, and I invite friends over, and I try to make it still a very warm, loving home, but it is absolutely not the same.
Yeah, and that's understandable, and especially with the community. It's not, I would say it's definitely a big portion of because the black community have been moved out, but the fact that there's so many different, it's not even DC, more so DC residents that live in Georgetown now, just people
Oh,
from all
Georgetown is very, very transient. I when I was running for office, you have to get a certain amount of signatures, like by July, to run to be on the ballot in the fall. And when I would go around the summer, so many people are gone. They they go to their other homes. They're here because they work for the government, or they're
Yeah.
here they work for the State Department, and it's dead because I'm actually in the community. I'm not like on the strip where the stores are, and holidays come. You can tell that people aren't from this area. That they're living here. It's a convenient location. um, so yes, this is a very and then we don't have a voice in our vote. So a lot of people still vote from where they're from. They keep their voting rights for their state. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely is a. I would say Georgetown is a different, very interesting point in where people are trying to kind of find what is the niche of Georgetown, especially with so many different walks.
And
So
then you have the school, and Georgetown University is recognized that slaves were used to build them. Um, most people don't realize the Father Healy that ran Georgetown was black. There's a lot of history there that people didn't realize he was African American. So they have their own rich history at Georgetown, that university that people don't know. So yeah, a tour could so many aspects. The waterfront. Um, people were embarrassed to say they lived down there. I mean, now you got multi-million-dollar condos. Yeah,
yeah,
it was a true. You look at the photos; it was a true harbor and pier down there, and it was kind of a slum area down by the water. So, oh yeah, so those it's interesting. It's really it's a lot to tell.
and all this kind of history and stuff. This what you learned from this talking during your upbringing, or do you feel like you do research?
Talking stories, and then they used to have a Black Georgetown reunion where all the families would come back to the park, to Rose Park, and celebrate and tell their stories. And I remember when we were champions in the city, and I remember the the, the May procession throughout the community. I actually have pictures of that, of my mother's little girl, and just being visible. The community day where now that I do remember as a growing up, where the black and white churches would come to get together and have a big community day every fall, a festival. I would like to bring that back. That is something that I would like to maybe work on doing again, um, and bring the world together. I will say the Citizens Association of Georgetown does a really good job recognizing the African American history for Georgetown. Every Black History Month, I help them put together a program. We've had Duke Ellington come perform. We've had former residents speak. Um, we've had talks about um, different well-known historians and the Black families that worked side by side or worked for them. And so I will say that there is the interest here with people who live here. And I don't know if it's always been that way, but definitely I can say in my life I've seen it.
Okay, so it's kind of just about building on that interest and
And to
kind of.
continue, and just to continue the storytelling, continue looking at the photos. There are a lot of photos that families have, and to preserve it. That's why I go back to how can we preserve it. Um, it's nothing in the African American Museum, and they're dealing with their own struggles right now with funding and everything. But a place where you could go and see. I have plenty of photos, families that have plenty of photos, but you have to preserve it and make sure it doesn't get sun damage and things like that. So, and oh, I keep getting a text message. I'm sorry. Um, but yeah, so I just will continue my fight and continue to pass on this stories.
Okay, that makes a lot of
And
sense.
again, I put a plug in Black Georgetown. Remember, definitely get a copy, and it's so much beautiful photos, family trees. There's a lot of history in that book.
Yes, and I'm sure after this interview, our DC Voice listeners will be running the valuable copy of Black Georgetown
Sure,
Remembers. We
sure.
appreciate that plug for sure. And That was basically all my questions for you, Dr. Monica Roche. I
Thank
appreciate you
you. I'm
talking.
very honored you reached out, and I'll definitely give you Lisa Fager's email, and so you can chat with her, and maybe you can go see the cemetery.
Okay, sounds good to me. Sounds good to
All
me.
right. Well, you enjoy your holiday. Good to talk with you.
You too. And I'm just gonna stop this recording real quick.
Okay.